Sometimes I just come down here and sit and look at the sea and listen to the waves and the pebbles, and it's beautiful. And it reminds me of all the times we've had together and the family holidays and the laughter and the fun. But it also is quite unpredictable, the sea, and can be frightening. Or I think it's frightening. And it's wild. And it makes me think that everything's sort of got that duality. And there are two sides to everything. And it just makes me think of twins, makes me think of my sister. I'm who I am, but would she have been the wild one, the unpredictable one? It's always a mystery, and I just wish I knew her and that she was here. And it just feels like there's been someone missing all my life. I've missed this person next to me. And when I think that, it's just like a wave of sadness and emotion just hits you. So my name is Helen Hone, and I'm 55 years old. I was born in 1968 in Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. My mother and father were both geography school teachers, and I had an older brother and an older sister. And I was always told that I was a bit of a mistake. They weren't expecting to have another child after such a gap between my brother and sister, and it was the family joke that they'd had a boy and they'd had a girl, so that they had to have a different variety. And of course I was a different variety because I was one of twins. So my mum was 36 years old when she had me, and that was quite old for a mother in 1968. So having twins was a real struggle for her. She was only 5'2", and about a week before we were born, she was having problems with blood pressure, not feeling very well, so she was taken into hospital. During that week, she was given an X-ray, because of course in 1968 they didn't realise the dangers of giving babies in the womb X-rays. And my mother was convinced that this X-ray was the cause of all the subsequent problems. A couple of days later, she noticed that there only seemed to be one baby moving. So she was taken back into hospital. They did some tests, and they weren't very happy. They thought as well that there was some problem with one of the babies. And she was taken into the delivery room, and she gave birth to my sister. And my sister was 5 pounds, so quite a healthy weight, and it was a fairly uncomplicated birth. But sadly, as she was born, the midwife said to my mum, "Don't look, we're going to take her away, we'll wrap her in newspaper and throw her away." And my mother couldn't believe what was happening, and she asked what was the matter, and they didn't talk to her, they didn't explain anything, and they didn't even show her my sister's body. And eventually they managed to deliver me. She said I was completely blue with just a red nose, tiny little baby, and she was terrified that I was dead as well, and they whisked me off to put me in an incubator, and then just left my mum not saying anything and began to sew her up. I felt really cross and angry at how my poor mum and dad and family were treated just because my sister was stillborn. She just seemed to be forgotten. She didn't live, so she was nothing.
Joan Woodward, a psychotherapist, lost her twin Pam when she was just 3 years old. Despite her being so young, Joan believes her death had a lasting effect.
This sense that something's missing, that something's not there that should be there, they're seeking a kind of closeness, and I think one of the hardest bits is you want to find that closeness again, but it never is available.
I always felt there was somebody missing, and it's only as I've done research just lately into the psychology of lone twins and how it affects them and their life that I now understand a lot of my feelings as a child. I always felt alone, but yet I was really happy. But it always felt like someone was missing. And of course they were. My other half, my twin sister, that relationship that you can never, ever replicate with anybody else, I yearned for. And certainly when I was younger, I had an imaginary friend. And this imaginary friend was a source of humour, you know, for my sister and my brother used to tease me, but vividly I remember having this imaginary friend with me all the time, and she was called Catherine, and she was my imaginary friend. And it's only as I've done the research on lone twins that this is a very common trait of lone twins, that they often do have imaginary friends to try and ease their pain.
I think other people were surprised to find how much twins who lost their twin at birth were so deeply affected. And of course that's because it was a lot of evidence to show that the thing that mattered to those twins is a very traumatic experience, a very painful one.
So then I grew up and went to secondary school and sixth form college, which I absolutely adored. Whilst at teacher training college, I'd got together with Duncan, and he was always a friend of mine. He'd been a friend sort of in the background all through my secondary school and sixth form college, and we gradually got closer and closer, and we were just the best of friends, and it sort of developed into more, and then got married in 1992. But sadly, my dad had been diagnosed at that point with melanoma. From a really active, healthy, positive man, he was reduced to this shadow of his former self, and he basically took 2 years to die, a horrible, painful death. And it was so cruel because my mum and dad were so happy together. They had the best marriage and they were a real partnership. And he died 6 months before the birth of his first grandchild. And that completely destroyed me because I had been so close to my father. We had got on so well. He was such an important part of my life. And I really struggled, and looking back, I now see that I'd first of all had to cope with the death of my twin and that very important relationship, and now yet again I'd lost somebody so important to me, and it destroyed me, and I struggled with being a new mum because I think I was so bereaved and I was so deep in grief. And then 27 years later, very suddenly and tragically, my mother died.
Helen, I've tried to phone you several times, but haven't managed to get through, darling. Can you call me? Bye for now.
This threw us all into the depths of grief. And Duncan, my husband, he saw that I needed something else. I needed something to keep my brain active and to occupy myself. So I started doing the Masters in novel writing. As part of the introductory sessions to this Master's degree, we had to write a section about ourselves. But in having to write this small section about myself, it suddenly became a really emotive description of my birth and then, of course, the death of my sister. First of all, spoke to my sister, and I said, did she remember anything about her birth or about a burial? But she couldn't remember anything. But what she did say, which was really spooky, was that she had chosen my name and my brother had been asked to choose my twin's name. But Celia, my sister, said she'd chosen Helen for me and my brother had chosen Catherine for my twin. We also had her house to sort through, and she was a bit of a kleptomaniac. And as we gradually worked through her belongings, I found a letter which had been written to my father. Dear Mr. Hone, may I remind you that the stillborn twin born to your wife at the above hospital has not yet been buried. I would be grateful if this matter may please have your urgent attention. So that again was evidence that she must have been buried. In my mum's diaries, I did discover that my twin sister had had an autopsy to establish why she died. Though my mum didn't say the conclusion to that autopsy, all she said was they could find nothing wrong with her. But any records of that autopsy I couldn't find. I began to get a bit disheartened. Everywhere I seemed to search drew a blank. The Lone Twin Network suggested I contacted the cremation records for Peterborough. So I contacted them, lots of emails going backwards and forwards. I mean, the Lone Twin Network say it's often just that one person who shows an interest in your story who can often give you a bit of a breakthrough. But there was this one lady who dug a little bit deeper. She tried to find some information, but sadly, she couldn't, but she suggested I contact the funeral directors who would have been around in Peterborough at that time and gave me a name. So I contacted the funeral directors, searched through all his records, and he actually had logged a phone call with my father at that time, obviously arranging the burial, but then there were no more records. But he suggested that my twin had been buried in a child grave, which is sort of a grave pit. So he directed me to a specific crematorium in Peterborough, Broadway Crematorium, and I contacted the man in charge of that crematorium, and he was really helpful, and he offered to meet me and show me where he thought she might have been buried. So my husband and I went up to Peterborough for a weekend. We visited the crematorium, which is now shut. They don't bury there anymore, but it's been turned into a nature reserve. Lots of big trees, and we visited on an autumnal day where there were all these different colours and the sun was shining and the sky was blue, and it was a beautiful day. And we met the man there, and he was very helpful, and he showed me the area where he thought Catherine might have been buried. And strangely enough, there was a grave marker for 1969, there was a grave marker for 65, so somewhere in between those grave markers, possibly Catherine might have been buried. I still felt a sense that I hadn't found her, even though we'd found an area where she might have been buried. When I stood there, I didn't feel any connection, and I thought I would. I thought I'd feel, yes, that's where she is. So although I was pleased that this was a possibility, I still felt I wasn't sure I had found her. So still feeling uncertain, I wanted to carry on, trying to find her if I could, or just to right some of the wrongs. I felt really cross and angry at how my poor mum and dad and family were treated just because my sister was stillborn. I completed my master's and I loved it. I found a new passion. I loved writing. And I've just recently finished this book about twins. It's about twins separated by death and a fantasy adventure of the twins trying to be reunited. And I've got a publishing deal, and my book is about to be published in April. And that is a real sense of pride for me. Not only have I written a book, which is something I've always wanted to do, I've got a second career, and I've written about my twin, who I felt had no place in this world because she's never lived the human life that she should have done, but now she's in this book. And so looking back over this journey, I've really realised that I now understand. I understand what it is to be a lone twin, and I understand how incredibly difficult it is. And it's something that isn't talked about, and I think many people don't even know what a lone twin is. And I hope by doing this documentary and hearing what I've had to do to try and find Catherine's burial place, this might help other people. And although the story ends with not really absolutely 100% feeling I found her, I have given her a memorial, and eventually I am quite convinced we will be reunited.